Have you ever had one of those breakthrough moments where you finally see something dark about yourself that you'd been avoiding for years? Maybe you realized you're more jealous than you thought, or that beneath your helpful exterior lies a need for control, or that your perfectionism is really just fear dressed up as excellence. You feel this rush of clarity, this sense of, finally I understand myself. And then something strange happens. Instead of feeling energized to change, you feel empty, deflated, like someone just let all the air out of your ambitions. What if I told you this isn't a sign that you've failed, but that you've succeeded so completely at touching something real about human nature that your psyche needs to reorganize itself around this new truth? And what if this temporary loss of motivation is actually the doorway to a more authentic and sustainable way of living? Before we dive into this psychological mystery, if this kind of deep exploration into the human psyche resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue bringing you these insights into the hidden workings of our minds. Let's start with what actually happens when we encounter our shadow. Picture Sarah, a successful marketing executive who prides herself on being collaborative and supportive. She's built her identity around being the person others can count on, the one who lifts people up. Then, during a particularly intense period of therapy or self-reflection, she realizes that underneath all this helpfulness is a deep resentment. She's been keeping score all these years, expecting gratitude and recognition that never comes. She discovers that her generosity has often been manipulation in disguise. The moment Sarah sees this clearly, she experiences what Jung called the collision with the shadow. That jarring recognition of aspects of ourselves we've disowned or never acknowledged. But here's what therapy books don't prepare you for. After this revelation, Sarah finds herself unable to be helpful in the same way. She can't fake enthusiasm for her team's projects. She can't muster the energy to volunteer for extra assignments. It's not just that she's choosing not to. She literally cannot access that familiar motivation. This pattern shows up everywhere once you start looking for it. The perfectionist who realizes their standards are a way of avoiding intimacy suddenly can't bring themselves to care about getting the details right. The people pleaser who recognizes their deep anger finds themselves unable to smile and nod through conversations. The overachiever who discovers their drive comes from a core sense of inadequacy, loses interest in their ambitious goals. Here's what makes this so disorienting. We expect self-awareness to liberate us, to make us more effective, more authentic, more motivated. Instead, we find ourselves in a kind of psychological limbo, unable to go back to our old patterns, but not yet knowing how to move forward authentically. The conventional wisdom tells us this is temporary. Just push through, integrate the insight, and get back to living. But this advice misses something crucial about how the psyche actually works. It treats shadow integration like updating software when it's actually more like renovating the foundation of a house while you're still living in it. To understand why facing our shadow creates this motivational vacuum, we need to explore what Jung meant by the shadow in the first place. The shadow isn't just our negative traits. It's everything we've had to disown to maintain our conscious identity. And here's the key. Our motivation systems are often built on top of these disowned aspects. Think of it this way. Imagine your personality is like an iceberg. The visible part above water is your conscious identity, how you see yourself and want others to see you. But underneath the waterline is this massive structure of disowned feelings, impulses and needs that you've pushed away because they didn't fit your self-image. The shadow lives in this underwater realm. Now, here's what's fascinating. The energy that powers your conscious motivations often comes from these shadow elements. Sarah's drive to be helpful wasn't just noble altruism. It was fueled by her disowned need for recognition and her secret resentment at being overlooked. When she recognizes this, she doesn't just gain insight into her shadow. she discovers that her primary motivational system was shadow-dependent. Evolutionary psychology gives us another lens for understanding this. Our brains are wired to maintain psychological coherence. We need consistent stories about who we are to function effectively. When we encounter our shadow, we're not just learning something new. We're discovering that our entire self-narrative has gaps and contradictions. The brain's response is often to shut down non-essential systems like motivation and enthusiasm, while it works to restore coherence. Recent research in neuroscience supports this. Studies on cognitive dissonance show that when people encounter information that challenges their core self-concepts, there's measurable activation in the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region associated with conflict monitoring. This creates a kind of mental static that can interfere with goal-directed behavior. But Jung understood something that modern psychology is just beginning to appreciate. This isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. The loss of motivation after shadow contact serves a crucial psychological function. It's your psyche's way of preventing you from simply grafting new insights onto old patterns. It forces you to sit in the discomfort long enough for genuine transformation to occur. Think of it like this. If you've been walking through life wearing shoes that don't fit, you might compensate by developing a particular gait, building up certain muscles, and ignoring the pain. When you finally take off the ill-fitting shoes, you don't immediately know how to walk normally. Your body needs time to remember its natural movement patterns. The shadow work equivalent is that temporary period where your old motivational patterns no longer work, but new ones haven't yet emerged. Here's the counterintuitive truth that changes everything. The loss of motivation after shadow work isn't a problem to be solved. It's information to be trusted. It's your psyche telling you that surface-level changes aren't enough anymore. You've glimpsed something so fundamental about your nature that continuing with business as usual would be a betrayal of this new awareness. Let me share what I call the Phoenix Principle in psychological development. Just as the mythical phoenix must burn completely before it can be reborn, sometimes our old motivational structures must fully dissolve before authentic ones can emerge. The motivation you lose wasn't serving your deepest self anyway. It was serving the persona, the mask you wear to get along in the world. Sarah's story illustrates this beautifully. During her period of motivational emptiness, she felt like she was failing at life. She couldn't access her old enthusiasm for helping others, but she also couldn't see what would replace it. Friends and colleagues noticed the change. She seemed less engaged, less present. But what was actually happening was that she was learning to tell the difference between genuine generosity and performance-based giving. After several months of this uncomfortable liminal space, Sarah began to notice something new emerging. When she did help others, it came from a place of authentic choice rather than compulsive need. She found herself saying no to requests that previously would have been automatic yeses. And paradoxically, her help became more valuable to others because it was freely given rather than driven by her own unmet needs. This reveals one of Jung's most profound insights. Wholeness isn't achieved by eliminating the shadow, but by integrating it consciously. When Sarah accepted her resentment and need for recognition as valid parts of her psychology, she didn't become a worse person. She became a more honest one. And from that honesty, authentic motivation could finally emerge. But here's where most people get stuck. They interpret the loss of motivation as evidence that they've made a mistake. They think, maybe I was better off not knowing about my shadow, at least I was productive before. This is like a person learning to walk again after an injury, complaining that physical therapy is harder than using crutches. The deeper truth is that shadow-dependent motivation is ultimately unsustainable. It's powered by internal conflict, by the tension between who you think you are and who you actually are. This creates a kind of psychological friction that burns through enormous amounts of energy. People living primarily from persona-driven motivation often experience burnout, cynicism, or a sense that their achievements feel hollow. When you face your shadow and lose the old motivational structures, you're not becoming lazy or broken. You're becoming available to discover what you actually care about when you're not performing for approval, avoiding pain, or trying to maintain an image. This is terrifying because it means giving up the familiar landmarks of your personality, but it's also the only path to genuine authenticity. So how do you navigate this challenging transition? How do you work with the loss of motivation rather than against it? The first step is to reframe what's happening. Instead of seeing it as a problem, recognize it as a necessary phase of psychological development. You're not broken, you're reorganizing at a fundamental level. Here's a practical framework I call the shadow integration process. Don't try to force your old motivation to return. Instead, get curious about what you've lost access to. What activities no longer feel meaningful? What goals seem suddenly hollow? This isn't depression talking. It's wisdom. Your psyche is showing you which parts of your life were shadow-dependent. Sarah spent time journaling about all the ways her helping behavior had been driven by unconscious needs. She noticed that she felt most depleted after helping people who never expressed gratitude, and most energized when her assistance was genuinely needed and appreciated. This helped her understand that her resentment wasn't pathological. It was pointing toward a legitimate need for reciprocity. Phase 2. Explore the emptiness. This might sound counterintuitive, but learn to inhabit the motivational vacuum rather than rushing to fill it. In Zen Buddhism, there's a concept called don't know mind, a state of openness that doesn't rush to conclusions. This empty space isn't lifeless, it's pregnant with possibility. Practically, this means saying no to commitments that you previously would have taken on automatically. It means sitting with boredom instead of immediately seeking stimulation. It means allowing yourself to not know what you want next. This isn't laziness, it's creating space for authentic desires to emerge. Phase 3. Listen for new signals. As you sit in this space, begin to notice what naturally draws your attention when you're not performing or achieving. What makes you curious? What problems bother you enough that you find yourself thinking about them without being asked? What activities do you find yourself doing purely for the joy of doing them? Sarah discovered that she was naturally drawn to mentoring younger colleagues, but only when they actively sought her guidance. She found herself energized by strategic planning sessions where her insights could genuinely impact outcomes. These weren't the broad, people-pleasing activities she used to engage in, but specific expressions of her authentic gifts. Phase 4. Experiment with authentic action. Start taking small actions based on these genuine impulses without attachment to outcomes. The key is to pay attention to how different activities feel in your body. Shadow-driven motivation often comes with tension, urgency, or a sense of should. Authentic motivation tends to feel more like expansion, curiosity, or natural flow. This doesn't mean everything will feel easy or effortless. Real passion often involves challenge and difficulty. But there's a qualitative difference between the struggle that comes from resistance to your authentic path and the difficulty that comes from engaging with something that truly matters to you. Phase 5. Build new structures gradually. As you identify sources of authentic motivation, begin building your life around them gradually. Don't expect to completely restructure everything at once. Think of it like physical rehabilitation. You start with small movements and gradually build strength and coordination. For Sarah, this meant slowly taking on projects that aligned with her authentic desire to contribute strategically rather than just being generally helpful. She learned to check in with herself before saying yes to requests, asking, is this genuine generosity or performance-based giving? One crucial element throughout this process is patience with the timeline. Shadow integration operates on geological time, not social media time. You might need months or even years to fully reorganize your motivational systems. This isn't a personal failing, it's the natural pace of deep psychological change. Here's what I want you to take away from this exploration. The loss of motivation after facing your shadow isn't a sign that you've gone off track. It's evidence that you're finally getting on track. You've touched something so real about your nature that your psyche refuses to let you continue living inauthentically. The path forward isn't about recovering your old motivation. It's about discovering what genuine motivation feels like. It's about learning the difference between the energy that comes from trying to maintain an image and the energy that comes from expressing your authentic nature. It's about trading the exhausting work of being who you think you should be for the challenging but sustainable work of becoming who you actually are. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your abandoned ally. Those disowned parts of yourself that you've been afraid to acknowledge often contain the very energies you need to live fully. The jealousy might contain information about what you truly value. The anger might be pointing toward boundaries you need to set. The selfishness might be showing you self-care you've been neglecting. When you stop fighting your shadow and start listening to it, something remarkable happens. You begin to access a form of motivation that doesn't depend on external validation, doesn't burn out from internal conflict, and doesn't leave you feeling empty even when you achieve your goals. So if you're in that uncomfortable space right now, if you've glimpsed your shadow and lost your familiar drive, I invite you to trust the process. Your psyche knows what it's doing. It's not taking away your motivation to punish you. It's clearing space for something more authentic to emerge. The question isn't how quickly you can get your old motivation back. The question is, what wants to be born from this fertile emptiness? What aspects of yourself have been waiting for permission to exist? What would you pursue if you weren't performing for approval or running from fear? These are the questions that can only be answered in the darkness of the shadow. And the answers, when they come, don't just restore your motivation. They transform it into something sustainable, authentic, and deeply satisfying. What shadow aspects of yourself have you been afraid to acknowledge? And what do you think might become possible if you stopped fighting them and started listening to what they're trying to tell you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this exploration has been valuable to you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the hidden workings of the human psyche.